Hey all, I know last update by now I was expecting to be back on trail and be doing daily videos, either on the Muggy on Rim or the PCT fallback. But as you probably guessed from the video thumbnail and how my voice sounds, it's gotten a little complicated. So as of the last video, this off season has been a little rough, at least since we got back from Raja Ampat, just due to a series of issues. I came off the American Discovery Trail involuntarily last year due to plantar fasciitis. I'd been working on that, some pre-stress fracture issues. I had some lower back pain, and right in the middle of all that, I had one heck of a respiratory infection. So it felt like one thing after another. What could possibly go wrong? I had missed out on events of my wilderness class, which is something I never ever do unless it's really serious. And then, so on March 20th, I was out and I was doing the latest of my rehab hikes. We were staying in an Airbnb in Ramona, and Iron Mountain and Ramona Grasslands had kind of been my go-to. Go out, walk relatively flats, little hills, 4 miles, dinky stuff, barely worth getting out of bed, for me normally in a season. At that point, I was actually hopeful. I thought I was going to at the very least make my last wilderness class outing, which is a snow camp up in the Sierra Nevada. So I was excited for that. I go out, I do the hike. I drove back to the rental. I grabbed Panda Express because options in Ramona are a little limited. Ate a bunch and started not feeling real great, like in my stomach. And I'm like, okay. Hadn't eaten all day, ate too much, went to bed to kind of like sleep it off. It didn't get better. And by the next day, things had gotten worse. Part of the problem here wasn't just that I was in pain. It was that I couldn't stand to be on my side or anything else. I had to be propped up on pillows and upright, or else the pain was just worse than unmanageable. And I am a side sleeper. I always sleep on my side no matter what, kind of curled up. So I wasn't able to sleep. Like, aside from the pain and everything else, I would have to get just to the point where I was absolutely exhausted to be able to fall asleep in this sort of position and just get a couple hours of sleep. And that was both freaky because, when you turn and all of a sudden you have like stabbing, horrible, something has made you wrong pain, plus you're just going longer and longer without any sort of sleep. That kind of escalated this even higher. I waited out to the next day, but my stomach just was not feeling right. I was feeling really bad, had pain to the point where we actually went to the urgent care. My primary care is hours away due to our kind of variable lifestyle here. So, okay, went to an urgent care in Rancho Bernardo. They looked at it. They did a few scans, tests, things like that, gave me some painkillers, and said it was probably just gastroenteritis. Basically I had something that inflamed. Jen had a whole moment with the nurses because one of their boyfriends had something similar happen from Panda Express. So at this point we're thinking, food poisoning, it's bad, but hey, this should be something that'll pass, right? They gave me a GI cocktail, didn't fix it. They shot me up with Toradol or something major. That gave me a little bit of a break. And eventually, after hours and hours and hours, I was sent home. The next day, I was basically back in enough pain. We went back. I couldn't control it. Nothing I had at home was touching it. This gut pain, which would continue, I would kind of describe it as kind of deep down, like it's crossed with that kind of hunger pain. But here it was moving around. So one day it might be up here, then it'd be down here. One day it was back around my kidneys. So I didn't know what was going on. We go in, they're starting to do x-rays, CT scans, anything just to figure out. And they're just ruling out any of the usual oh, well, it doesn't look like you have kidney stones. Doesn't look like you have any sort of a blood clot. That was a big one because I had this D-dimer test that was high during the respiratory infection. So after being back at that same urgent care for hours, this time they're not giving me painkillers and all the tests are coming up negative. We decide to go to the ER. It's that bad, they can't deal with it. So Jen drives me over. Fortunately, since we'd had such a good experience with this Scripps urgent care, we went to Scripps La Jolla Emergency, which ended up being very, very good for what was going to follow. Having said that, the first visit to Scripps ER was not great. Went in, they looked, I had a complete like workup at the urgent care. They gave me some painkillers. They gave me some prescriptions for, I think that was about when they started me on Percocet or Dilaudid. I guess it was Percocet at that point, and sent me back home. This was frustrating because here I was, I'd been in bad pain for 2 days. It takes a lot for me to go into an urgent care or a doctor in general, and having to go back and then feeling like the urgent care and the ER didn't help me, couldn't do anything, was pretty stressful. So one quick note here, this was a learning experience for me, that they treat you differently in the ER if you have to go back. If you've never dealt with like a family member that had something serious and has had to do like multiple trips to the ER, you walk in off the street with pain, they will help you, but they will treat you very differently if you come back the next day still saying you're in a lot of pain, unmanageable pain, etc. Fortunately, I had a friend who actually explained this to me and was the direct like reason for me going back and getting help sooner rather than just like panicking and feeling like I was home alone. But just if you ever run into that situation, do not hesitate to go back into the ER. Having that multiple day record does change how they treat you. So at this point, they discharged me, painkillers. They're still saying it's likely some sort of gastroenteritis. They're giving me some things like sulforaphane and a proton pump inhibitor, just assuming it's like heartburn or an ulcer or something like that. But I'm in so much pain that, again, I'm being driven into these like urgent care ER situations because I need painkillers because I can't take it. I'm just like rolling around in pain. So the next day I'm back at home, and I was living pain pill to pain pill, and it was the usual thing where you take one, you get some relief for a couple of hours. By the end of it, I'm rolling around groaning in pain again. Jen is just distraught watching me go through all this, and none of the medication or anything else they're doing seems to be having any sort of effect. And at this point, I'm getting desperate because I feel like we already went to the ER. That's already escalated it, and they didn't do anything last time. Fortunately, friends are a good thing to have. We happened to chat with a doctor friend of ours who chatted with an ER doctor friend and gave us advice of, you need to go back to the ER. You need to not understate what your pain is. If you are saying you are out there with 9 out of 10 gut pain and it's not manageable, you need to go in there and tell them that right now. So we loaded everything back up, went into the ER. I hate describing pain. It's a pet peeve. I'm an engineer. It's like I need things to compare it to, and I'm always afraid to give too high of a number, describe it wrong and get like the wrong thing. But went in, pretty much correctly said, yes, I've been in 9 out of pain for days. I can't take this. I was brought in, and finally things started moving. So they started running blood tests. We were trying to push back on CT scans because by now I'd had like 4 of them since coming off trial, and there are radiation concerns on having a ton of them. They start doing blood tests, and I get like a D-dimer test that's back at 4,000, and 40 was high before. Other than that, they're not really finding anything. They're palpating, but there's nothing that's standing out as, oh yeah, this is a clear indicator. They do shoot me up on painkillers. I think this was at the point I started on Dilaudid, which at least gives me some result, but every test is just coming up inconclusive. We let them do another CT scan because, okay, I don't want more radiation, but I need something here. Unfortunately, the CT scan didn't show anything other than maybe some enteritis, but no blockages, anything else that could explain this pain. And again, this pain is moving around, so it's not like, oh, this is a kidney stone, this is this, that, or the other. And at this point, I've had so many blood tests that any of the easy answers were kind of out of reach. So after a while, as I was coming off one of the pain shots, ER doctor comes in and says, yeah, we're going to admit you to the hospital. For better or worse, I have been very lucky in my life, and I don't think I've actually been in a hospital since I was 8 and had my tonsils out. And here I am, exhausted, I'm in pain, I'm having this image of being like jammed into a ward with a whole bunch of like screaming people, and Yeah, but at this point, it's like, I need something. I can't manage the pain. I can't be out there alone. So this was the evening of March 24th, and I was admitted onto the 6th floor of Scripps La Jolla Hospital in what I would find out was the medical oncology wing. They put me into this small room, hooked me up on a bunch of stuff, and I was put on an IV, and that was what was hydrating me and feeding me for the next couple of days. That night was really, really rough. Jen had to leave, so I was on my own. I was in a lot of pain. Every couple of hours, the dilaudid pain shots they were giving me would wear off. I would be just miserable. Fortunately, I had one of what was a lot of really good nurses. I have wished I could go back and thank several of them personally, just for getting me through a really rough time. She was in there all the time talking to me, just helping me, because being in a hospital tends to be a kind of surreal experience to begin with, combined with being in so much pain, combined with not knowing what was going on. By this point, I'd been in pain for like 4 days, and it didn't feel like it was ever going to stop, and I was just kind of like lost in it. So I was very, very grateful for Nurse Sam getting me through that first night. So the next day, now I am fully into the hospital system, which means you wake up and they're taking your blood first off. I was constantly getting my blood pressure, everything else monitored. And Scripps works on kind of, I guess, a committee thing. So it's not just you have a doctor, you have a coordinating hospitalist that changes every 4 days or so, and you have a series of specialists. So because of what was going on, I had a couple of different specialists involved, everything from a vascular team to a general surgeon to esophagus guy. I'm forgetting. So at this point, we have a general surgeon who comes in, starts talking to us about, okay, it could be enteritis, it could be this, could be that. And I am getting just blood tests for everything at this point, trying to rule stuff out. Because they ask what my recent history is, and obviously I'm like, well, I get places, sleep in the dirt, I've been here, underwater, above water, yada, yada. At this point, they still thought it was a chance, just enteritis, something weird in part of my colon. Also, possibly it had something to do with, I'd been on opioids for like 4 days by now, or maybe a few days, and it could have been, like blockage, constipation, they don't know. So I'm put on gut rest, meaning I'm not allowed to eat or drink anything. They monitor every bit of liquid that comes out of me, and I'm just on an IV full time, just trying to get through the day, pain period to pain period. The way the pain drugs work is they give you what they think is the dose you need, and they adjust that over time. And then if you can't make it all the way through, there is a breakthrough. So I would basically be sitting there trying to manage it as long as I possibly could, hit the button, the nurse would come in, and I would get another shot into my IV. It was mostly all Dilaudid, which is, an opioid. And I'm not the biggest fan of being on those. I have had to have Percocet and things for very limited periods before. Jen thought I was crazy, but I was actually watching Nurse Jackie through all this. I'd started it right before all this started, and it's about a nurse with an opioid addiction. And I also know people that have had issues there, so my brain just starts screaming anytime like I'm on anything like that I want to be off it. There was just no managing this. I mean, the chart reads intractable gut pain, and that was pretty much my go-to description this entire time. So the second day is just taken up by a bunch of tests. They do an ultrasound of my abdomen, checking the blood vessels, and this was the first time we heard the term MALS as a possibility, which is a issue where you have a blood vessel that is constricted by a ligament and can cause weird issues in organs. It was really a long shot. They just kind of mentioned it as one of the other teams. I think Vascular has brought it up, but they were still looking for like parasites. They were looking for, okay, we need to look down here. We need to look at your bowels, stuff like that. They were checking me for blood clots because of the high D-dimer again. And, my blood tests just showed general inflammation with nothing clear. So the 25th and the 26th were basically sit around, wait and see. Finally, on the 27th, my pain seemed like it was significantly worse. They didn't have anything showing on any of the scans. They were pretty sure it wasn't just constipation at this point causing the major of the issues. So at this point, they start to look at, we're going to want to look down your throat because that's less invasive. And then we're going to have to go in and do a diagnostic laparoscopy just to get eyes on and see what's going on down here. The endoscopy was ruled as the least invasive. So they did that first, put me under, put a tube down my throat. And other than some like initial things that are classified as GERD, like a little acid reflux, there was nothing wrong. They took some samples of some polyps, body being weird, but there was nothing. So at that point, it was moved on to, we're going to have to do the diagnostic laparoscopy, open you up and look. I had to sign a bunch of paperwork. It was, at this point, my mindset was just do whatever you have to do. I was kind of heads down and in pain, but I had to sign off on all sorts of things. And the comforting thing the surgeon told me was, it's okay. I may have to remove like a small amount of your intestine if I find something, but you're probably not going to wake up with a colostomy bag or anything. And I was like, thank you, doctor. He was great. He was great. I loved his bedside manner. He kept coming back and checking on us. But that did kind of put me back for a second there. So basic idea was they go in laparoscopically, look all over my internals, see if they can identify anything. Is there a tumor? Is there this, that, or the other? Take a really hard look at my intestines and see what they can find. So on 3/28, I'm prepped for surgery and I go into surgery. At this point, Jen was moving back and forth between school about an hour and a half north in Irvine and was just killing herself she can't just take time off school. I mean, she works hard and she is very busy. Teachers do not have an easy schedule, but she was there when I came out of surgery. All I remember before going down on surgery, the anticipation is the worst, the losing control going under, but I just wanted them to put me under so the pain would stop. It was that persistent and bad. So went under for the second time, came out. They said it went really, really well. They said they didn't see a damn thing other than maybe one little part of the intestine that had a little bit of inflammation, but nothing that could explain this. And yeah, I mean, I was half convinced I was going to come out and they were going to have found like some sort of tumor or growth or something like that. But it basically ruled out all abdominal organ type effects that they could check for. The surgeon basically said, okay, at this point, that MALS diagnosis that we thought was so unlikely, we're going to start looking at that harder because the endoscopy was clear. We didn't see anything here. It's the next most likely, and they looped in a new surgeon. Now, if you've never had a laparoscopy, I associate them with like less invasive surgery. And it is true, I wasn't like fully sliced open, but they fill your interior with CO2. And then they were really rooting around a lot. I got to see some pictures of my insides, which are like, oh, okay. And once they are done and they come out, there tends to be gas bubbles that get stuck. And they can end up under the diaphragm, and you have what's called, I believe, referred pain, which basically means it feels like somebody is stabbing you so hard in the shoulder. When I would be just generally sore when I was lying down, and when I would get up and I would be upright and that bubble would move, I would literally be on the bed just in so much pain I couldn't manage for a few minutes before it would calm down. That was freaky at first until we realized that is like what happens post-laparoscopy. I really wish I had been warned, but I spent the next 2 days like just trying to avoid having to get up whenever I could because that was so bad. At this point, I'd been in pain for a better part of a week. Bad pain that mostly couldn't be managed. And I was finding that my tolerance for it was going down. I've been in enough wilderness first aid situations where it's like you got to pull something out and deal with a wound for a while. Knees skinned, you got to hike on it, etc. But this was just, my tolerance was going down. I was being bothered more by, the needles being put in for blood draws, things like that. In the middle of all this, I had to be on an IV, and they kept having trouble with the IVs for various reasons. So when you come into the ER, they give you an IV, but they put it right in your shoulder or your elbow joint. And that has to be removed after 48 hours because higher risk of infection. Didn't know that. Well, I'd been there that long, and then when they moved it, they did it at a time where I think they had maybe a less experienced nurse doing it. I had a few cases where it took them multiple tries to get an IV in, and IV needles are a lot more painful, especially when you start having to go for CT angiograms, which put a caustic fluid in you, so you need a bigger needle, so it's a lot more painful. So I had some really rough times, and my arms were starting to look just track marked. At one point, the IV on my right actually went bad after the first surgery. My hand swelled up. I couldn't bend it. They had to pull that IV, mark my entire right arm as a limb alert. And it turned out I had a superficial blood clot in my shoulder, or in my elbow, on my right elbow. And so nothing could be taken out of that arm. Everything had to start coming out of this arm. So I started to get really terrified anytime they had to swap the IV, just because it had been so bad. And they had to swap it a couple of other times. And like they sent people once with like an ultrasound to like move it in, but I was apologizing profusely every time because I couldn't control my reactions to the pain. And I knew they needed to do their job. I was very, very grateful. Every single day I tried to tell all the nurses that, you know, I really appreciated everything they were doing, and I apologized if I wasn't quite my cheerful self. But yeah, IVs were one of my major pain points during all this. So now that they had the endoscopy, the laparoscopy, they'd basically ruled out everything, and MALS, median and arterial ligament syndrome, was now the leading explanation. They needed to do a CT angiogram with contrast. That is how you basically verify that the blood flow is constricted to the organs. They had an indicator from the ultrasound, but the angiogram was what was needed. And I actually begged off on the 29th because I was terrified of having to straighten up. I still couldn't manage. After 2 days, that started to fade. I was moving around, wandering around the ward, shifting, trying to get the rest of that bubble out. So we wait another day. They're able to do the CT. This is now like my 5th CT since coming off trail. My advice is, if you ever go to the urgent care and they just try and do a CT scan, say no, because you never know when you're actually going to need one, and they seem to overprescribe them. But yeah, rant over. So by the 30th, I'm feeling better. I'm walking around the ward. I'm able to get a sunshine pass the next day and go outside with Jen, because I've been locked away in a hotel room or in a hospital room for days at this point. And they bring in Dr. Boyrell, who is basically a surgeon that specializes in MALS and similar type things. We were actually really lucky. The fact that this hospital had a surgeon that kind of specialized in MALS, had a lot of experience with it, made us feel very fortunate as we were looking at this, because we're doing research all over the place, and like, this is a scary thing. But you see people who have suffered with it for like years before they can get the diagnosis. The fact we were in the hospital and all this got like rushed, and Scripps treated it seriously, and they got me that angiogram within like a week, was nothing short of a miracle. People come in after years of dealing with this to the point where they have a feeding tube into their stomach. They're adverse to food. They've lost like a massive amount of weight. So after all the tests, Dr. Boyrell was 80% confident that this is what it was. It was very highly indicated by the scans. They could see that I wasn't getting blood flow to organs. That at least was an explanation for why the pain was kind of like moving around versus, okay, I just have pain in this organ here. He gives us the options. We had done our own research. I will say ChatGPT is an amazing tool for trying to kind of go through medical journals and things like that, and just to take the results we were getting back from the hospital and kind of clean them up and get context. That's become our number one tool through all this. Still got to verify stuff, but very, very useful. So we had seen that there's a celiac block, so that you can put a block on a nerve, and if that takes the pain away, that's a pretty good indicator that that's what's going on. Per the surgeon, well, the problem with that is if you're going to do this surgery, it's way in there. It's kind of a major surgery. You want to have the field of play clean, as he put it. So we could do the block, but then surgery was going to be, 4+ months off. So we're looking at it. I had to think about it. Obviously, I wasn't in kind of the best mind state. He came back the next day, but just looking at it, I mean, I couldn't deal with the thought of being in pain like this. I mean, it was completely debilitating. Also, if I had the surgery, if it was successful, day in the hospital, a week at home under care, a month recovery. That meant return to life, versus potentially having to spend, a good chunk of the year just sitting around debilitated. So it made sense to go through with the surgery, and it was scheduled for April 2nd. So this had only been going on since the 20th. I was very lucky. He was able to fit me in at the end of the day on his surgical schedule. We were told there was a possibility we'd be bumped, but I was still prepped. No food, no anything. Just I have the IV. I'm sitting around and I'm waiting, hoping that it's going to happen, because for me, it's the anticipation. What's harder, getting punched in the face or like being about to be punched in the face? Night before the surgery that hopefully fixes this. Hopefully. So I was brought into surgery at about 3 o'clock on April 2nd. So before you go into surgery, you're in a prep area where they go through and they make sure exactly what they're doing. They ask you like 3 times what they're doing, because if you remember, like years ago, somebody went in to have a leg amputated and they did the wrong one. So they're very, very careful and thorough. And the entire time I'm just like, please put me under, just like end this. But at the same time, like I'm miserable, but I'm trying to keep context. The person next to me, I'm listening to their conversation, and they were in their 30s and they were going in and they were going to have a colostomy bag. Walking around the ward can be really sad, because you're getting these little glimpses of people who are going through like life-altering, life-ending stuff. So it wasn't like I was completely despairing or anything. I was trying to hold on to the fact that at least so far everything they're finding is fixable. But if you've ever been in like pain that you can't escape from for any length of time, it's its whole own psychological thing. So I go under, they put me out, I'm wheeled up, I come out of surgery, and I am in a lot of pain. I remember the post-op place. I remember them asking how I'm doing. I remember just saying I was in pain, them giving me more stuff. Jen's upstairs waiting in the room for me to be returned. And she said the nurse was looking at my care notes and said, okay, yeah, he's out. He is on a lot of stuff. But they wheel me back up and everything's good. They had done the MALS ligament release repair, and they had also found a little initial hiatal hernia. And while they were in there, they put a stitch and fixed that. So prevented a minor fix later on. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures or video of the surgery itself, because that would be kind of interesting. But Dr. Boyle did say that when they did the repair, they could actually see the blood going through the artery unrestricted afterwards. He also said that as they see this restriction, I was on the upper end of constricted blood flow. So to his mind, that did follow through with all the scans and everything as far as explaining what was going on. My organs had this congenital restriction for a while. It's possible something shifted and it became more prominent. When you look online, sometimes people have some sort of gut hit or anything like that. Something shifts and it suddenly affects them. But there's every reason to believe this was just a congenital thing, and not I don't know how many people I have had message me going, oh, it must be tics or something else like that. It's a genetic thing. None of my family has it as far as I know. I'm adopted, so I have limited contact with birth parents, things like that. I was in a lot of pain. At this point, they also moved me to a different area of the hospital. I had been on the 6th floor medical oncology, and now they moved me to a surgical ward, which was nice. The room was nicer. I was kind of sad because the 6th floor nurses were just amazing. I had a bunch of them that, again, I just wish I could go back and thank individually, because their bedside manner and getting to chat with them really got me through some very, very rough nights, because days in hospitals are bad, but nights are kind of an endless fever dream, especially when you're in pain. So now it's April 3rd. I'm still having the shoulder pain, from the air bubble, but it's less this time. This surgeon did a little bit better job of like cleaning out the air bubbles. He said he just uses a straw to get them out of there. But in general, my face was clear at this point. Like everybody who came by to see me of the doctor team kept saying that I didn't look like I had a cloud over me as much. My main complaint was a surgical site in my stomach. And when Dr. Boyrell came in and I said, yeah, there's a big pain like right down here by my belly button. And he just looked at me and went, oh, that's because a brown man stabbed you there. Him being brown. So that was the main surgical site, and that was my main complaint. And so I was on a lot of pain meds just to manage that. But at this point, at least it felt like, hey, this seems like it may have actually worked. Worst thing that happened, because again, the shoulder thing, I knew what it was. I could deal with it. I knew how to move, etc. Was I tried to eat something. I was on normal food by now. And they have really good food service at Scraps when you're allowed to eat. Tried to eat a chicken tender because that's one of those things I could get down before. And it didn't go down. I started gagging and like it got stuck past the back of my throat and I ended up having to gag it back up. Called the nurse in a panic and she's like, oh, yeah, that can happen. Don't eat anything solid. And I'm like, so that was fun on top of everything else. Also, this is April 3rd. Unfortunately, this was when the Ramona Airbnb, we had to move out. Again, the plan was I was supposed to be leaving for Colorado. Obviously, that wasn't happening, to get on trail and everything. So Jen had to basically pack everything in between taking care of me and visiting me in the hospital. And then she moved us out that day. We got another temporary rental for a week and a half in Valley Center, relatively near the hospital, just so I would have some place to rehab post-surgery. Because again, we don't have a permanent residence here, and I couldn't really be lying around a campground or anything. So she moves us out, moves us to the new place. The people that rented it from us from Ramona were amazing. They gave us some extra time. We're actually going to go back there next winter because we just loved that little cabin. And then she came back and was with me that night again in the hospital. She spent the night, a good amount of the time there. They had a little pull-out couch, and whenever she could, she would stay. I would actually push her not to a couple of times just because it's hard to sleep in the hospital, and I wanted her to recover as much as possible because her job is long hours and all that. So that brought me to April 4th, which was my 12th day in the hospital. At this point, it seems like the pain's gone. I am off of painkillers. Everything else is coming back good other than I've got, the surgical sites, stuff like that. And so I was discharged. The best part of that was finally getting that IV out of my arm, because the worst part of the entire hospital stay, if you ask me, is, having that thing sticking out uncomfortably, and never mind if it's going bad and having to be swapped and all of that. So it was just such a relief to get that off, to be able to go back home, to shower fully, get clean, not be wearing a hospital robe, though the socks were okay. And at this point, I was probably at my most hopeful, because it seemed like I'd had something bad, but it was post-surgical recovery. There was, every hope things were going to improve. And we really thought at this point that while I might not be able to get on the PCT or anything before, the Yukon was still going to happen. The specialist was saying he had every reason to believe, that the surgeon, that was still going to happen, that was going to be reasonable. We weren't going to do anything dumb, but you got to have something to live for. And anytime I go under medical care, I learned my lesson years ago that quality of life is one of those things you have to explain to the doctor, because they don't know. When I had my knee surgery, there are people who they need a knee replacement, but their quality of life is being able to move around town and, play golf or do like this, that, or the other. For me, I need to be able to get outside. I need to be able to do stuff. And if I can't, I don't have quality of life. And that might mean I need more invasive care than the bare minimum to keep that. So like I said, hard lessons, but I learned that years ago with the knee stuff. And I was very clear. And like I said, we thought that, okay, that had been rough. But when Jen took me out of the hospital, she was looking there with like shining puppy dog eyes, so happy. And it really seemed like there was a good chance I was on the mend. Unfortunately, it did get more complicated from here. You can hear my voice is going. There are other things going on, so I'm actually going to split this into two because I don't think I can make it through all this in one go. So stay tuned for further complication.